Chapter 19, Hiccup's birthday present. Bertha waited until they were safely out of earshot, and then she shook her fist up at the sky and shouted, "That's right, off you go, you idiotic old stinkpot. Us bug burglars aren't afraid of you, you know." "Well," sighed Big Bertha, "that was a close one. I have got to admit, Steric, this skinny prawn of a son of yours, it may not look up to much, but he may not be able to burgle for toffee, but he can certainly think on his feet." "He sure as Thor can burgle for toffee," objected Steric, thumping his son delightedly on the back. "He's burgled a book for the Meathead Public Library. Where is the book, Hiccup?" Silently, Hiccup reached inside his backpack and drew out the How to Train Your Dragon book, second edition, and handed it to Steric. "Not to mention stealing a secret weapon from you and Magguts the murderess. Not bad for a 12-year-old, I'd say. And what's more, he's proved that hooligans are just as good at burglary as bog burglars. So I think you'll find that I've won our little bet. You better stump up those axes, Bertha, like a good little loser." Steric rubbed his hands together in glee. Of course, Big Booby Bertha could never be described as a good little loser, and she swelled up in fury, her beard bristling and her ham-like fists a clench. But she was a good sport at heart and a Viking of her word. And after all, young Hiccup here had just saved her from an unpleasant spell in the ugly thug's Lavelands. She'd have escaped, of course, but you can't keep a bog burglar under lock and key, but it would have been a nasty experience nonetheless. So her stormy brow cleared, and she reached into her axe belt and brought out 2 of her finest axes and gave them to Steric with reasonable good humour. After all, at the end of the day, she had lost 2 axes, but gained a rather magnificent sword. A murderous sword is hard to come by. "Excellent," roared Steric the Vast. "I hope you'll join us this evening for Hiccup's birthday banquet." "But of course," thundered Baby Bertha, rubbing her hands excitedly, but she was always the life and soul of the party. "I shall be presenting him with a new sword as a birthday present," boomed Steric, trying unsuccessfully to sound careless and not bursting with pride at his son's achievement. "Oh, that's nice." That afternoon, "A sword suitable for a boy who is now a 12-year-old and the son of a Viking chief, not to mention a burglar of some distinction." Father," interrupted Hiccup, "I'm quite pleased with my old sword, really. There's something else that I would really like as a birthday present." "You can have anything," promised Steric, rashly, because he was so delighted to have won his bet against Big Booby Bertha. "Anything at all. Axes, spears, a new dragon, anything at all." "Well," said Hiccup slowly, "what I would really like, now the hairy scary librarian is got rid of, is for books not to be banned. Great thing to ask for. And that library to be open to the public again. Those drilly dragons are making an awful mess of the place." Steric's brows descended angrily. This wasn't what he'd been thinking of at all. "I know you think How to Train Your Dragon is the only book worth having and the Vikings don't need books, but there are loads of books in that library that you would find incredibly useful," pleaded Hiccup. "Oh, there's books about sword fighting, books about axe work, about all the different types of dragon, books with maps in that will help you sell to Africa and India and America." "No such place," snorted Steric. "We nearly died in that library," said Hiccup, "but we didn't because we knew how to deal with a pithworm, and that's how books can help you, Father. They can save your life. They really can." Steric looked thoughtful. From out of his breast pocket he drew the scruffy copy of A Hero's Guide to Deadly Dragons that he had confiscated from Hiccup earlier that morning. This notebook really had saved Steric's life, only 10 minutes earlier. For when the hairy scary librarian shot the arrow, the sharp point of it had sunk into the book rather than into Steric's chest. It had nearly cut the poor bedraggled book in half, so deep had been the wound. Maybe it was a sign from Thor. Perhaps books weren't as dangerous as they looked, and maybe they really could be useful in the Viking tribes. He would wanted to go to Africa. Grunted Steric the Vast. He handed A Hero's Guide to Deadly Dragons back to Hiccup. A Viking chief shouldn't change his mind, thought Steric, so he tried to sound as stern and chiefly as he could in the hope that nobody would notice. "I really think you need to write this book out again," Hiccup scolded Steric sternly. "Look at it, it's in a disgraceful state. And as for that other matter, I'll speak to the thing about it." Hiccup grinned delightedly. Steric the Vast and Big Booby Bertha stomped off, spiritedly discussing axe-fighting moves and who was the better wrestler. "But of course I'm a better axe fighter than you are, Steric. You hooligans couldn't fight your way out of a paper bag. Why, I bet you 2 of my finest swords that—" "Happy birthday, Hiccup," smiled Fishlegs. "You must admit," said Kamikaze, looking at Hiccup a trifle anxiously, "it's been a really good one." Hiccup clasped a hero's guide to deadly dragons to his chest. When you only have a birthday once every 4 years, it is important that it's a good one. He surveyed the day. On the whole, it wasn't quite what he'd hoped for, which was a really quiet, peaceful 24 hours. He'd stolen a secret weapon belonging to Mad Guts the murderess. He'd knocked out a deadly dragon, a driller dragon. He'd narrowly avoided being stuck on the end of one of the hairy, scary librarian's heart slicers. He'd been lost in a labyrinth. He'd discovered the dragon whisperer's way. He dealt with an entire nest of piffleworms. He recovered his father from death by Northbow and Big Booby Bertha from being sent to the Ugly Thug's slave lands. Just a normal day in the barbaric archipelago, really. But it all turned out right in the end. Thor only knows how. But this was the surprising thing about life on Berk. It was a bit like the sea itself. 1 minute was all storms and shipwrecks and desperate escapes from deadly dragons. The next it was as calm and peacefully restful, as if these things had never happened. The sun had gone down now, and the stars were beginning to come out in a darkening sky, reflected like candles in the glass-backed bay below. Further down the hillside in the hooligan village, fires were being lit in preparation for the birthday banquet, and the first sounds of singing could be heard. Rather surprisingly, despite being some of the roughest, toughest rabble of plug-ugly barbarians you could ever have the misfortune to come across, the hooligans were excellent singers, and their deep, gorgeous voices rose up with the plumes of smoke in gentle, peaceful harmony. Hiccup gave a sigh of contentment. Hiccup was extremely fond of his family, but he didn't always find it easy being so very, very different from the rest of his hooligan relations. If Toothless and Kamikaze hadn't drawn him into the library labyrinth, he would never have discovered that he had a secret ancestor, someone with the same name and the same interests as Hiccup himself. And somehow this discovery made him feel a lot less lonely in the world. "Yep," said Hiccup, "what with one thing and another, it's been an excellent birthday." Kamikaze turned a celebratory cartwheel. Hiccup began to stroll down to the banquet with his good friends Fishlegs and Kamikaze. They were down to the village, lit up by little sparks of flickering glowworms shining deep in the darkness of the bracken. Are you coming to the banquet, Stormfly?" asked a blushing Toothless from his perch on Hiccup's helmet. "I might," replied the Stormfly carelessly, swooping down low over a marsh they were passing in order to admire her reflection in the water. Nobody knows what the Stormfly might do. Toothless knows where they keeping the food, suggested Toothless eagerly. At the mention of food, Stormfly's yellow eyes lit up. "Lead on, no gummy one," drawled the Stormfly. The two little dragons flew off into the direction of the village, and Hiccup called out anxiously after them, "You're not going to go nicking the food now, Toothless, before the banquet's even begun. Remember, you got us into all this trouble in the first place. Be good now, Toothless." Stormfly batted her beautiful long eyelashes. "Oh, wouldn't dream of stealing any food or causing any trouble, would we, Toothless?" she called out over her shoulder. "Don't you worry, anxious human with freckles. Stormfly will keep an eye on him. You can trust the Stormfly." And as the two little dragons soared downwards towards the quiet and restful, unsuspecting village below, even in the darkness of the evening, Hiccup could see the elegant, swooping little form of the Moo Dragon blush from gold to violet to deepest indigo as she flew. That's nice. And look, there's a picture of those naughty little dragons taking off the banquet food. And I'll read you the epilogue.